with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is loving ourselves into wholeness. We're taught to judge ourselves and others, and in so doing, we create a separation within ourselves. We exile parts of ourselves or make them uh, separate. So what we're going to look at is actually how we can activate our compassion to love ourselves into wholeness. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue, and now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling as you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. Good morning, Rosalind. And good morning, freelancer Golam Rabi. Welcome. Wonderful to have you here this morning. Rosalind, you said that you're not seeing it on Facebook. I checked, and it does look like we're on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. And good morning, I am loved by God. Welcome. So good to start the week off with you all. So today we're talking about loving ourselves into wholeness. And really the theme of separation and separateness that so permeates our culture and our indoctrination, our programming. We are taught to look at the world outside of ourselves, to receive our validation from externalities. We're taught to that our worth is based on how much we earn, what we've accomplished, who we know, what we wear, how we live, what our houses are like, et cetera, all these externalities. And as a result of, or correlated, I think, to this external need for validation, what's happening is we're seeing ourselves separate from all these things, right? Things, mostly things in the world. And that trickles down to our sense that we're comparing ourselves all the time, right? What happens is we're judging based on these externalities. We're making comparisons. We do that for ourselves, and we place judgment on ourselves sort of as separate. Like we see things that we don't like in ourselves, perhaps, and as a result, we judge them, we make them separate, we make ourselves wrong. And what that does is it more deeply separates ourselves from ourselves. And what we're talking about today is being able to create wholeness that these parts of ourselves that perhaps we're judging are trying to communicate to us a need for attention, a need for healing. And we can be, we've talked about this a lot, curiosity and compassion. We can address these aspects of self with compassion, with curiosity, with a response to a call for help rather than a call for judgment. So when people have been beat up, we don't beat them up for having been beaten up, right? When someone is wounded, hopefully we seek to heal. This is something we get to apply to ourselves as well. That rather than exiling these parts of ourselves or shunting them away into some dark corner and pretending they don't exist, what we get to do in our path to healing is to embrace those parts of ourselves, to look at what kind of attention they're calling for, what they need, how they can heal, how they can be embraced as part of ourselves. We all have light and dark. We all have a spectrum of expression and being. And to be hearing dark thoughts and trying to silence them without some kind of recognition. For instance, if we have a dark thought, to say, wow, what is going on that I might think that? Where's the wound that might generate that kind of thinking? What might I be able to do to nurture this part of myself back into wholeness? Because wholeness is exactly that. It's wholeness. It's the spectrum. So if we look at life, the spectrum is inception or conception, gestation, birth, life, decline typically, but death ultimately, right? And whether that cycle repeats or however that moves, it's a spectrum of the experience of life, right? So it's all of it. It's the tragedies, it's the triumphs, it's the light, it's the darkness, it's all the colors and shades in between. And as we can find an ability, a tolerance, a capacity to face all these aspects of ourselves full on, not in defiance, but in curiosity and compassion, what happens is that we can allow ourselves to become more whole, that we can see we're not perfect within the context of perfection being defined by specific behaviors, for example, that we're not always good, we're not always generous, we're not always kind, we're not always anything, you know, we're not always hateful, we're not always angry, we're not always depressed. We are engaged in a process called living, and living evokes many, many, many responses. And having that range and being able to face those dark aspects of ourselves actually opens the door to the possibility of choice. To say, to be starting to get angry, and because we have been willing to own our anger, because we've been willing to encompass our anger, then we can actually then allow ourselves the latitude of choosing not to become angry. Because when we deny it, when we repress it, when we ignore our feelings, what happens is they become magnified and they can become explosive. They can take us over because we're not present. So I was watching a show, a movie, and someone was giving advice about marriage and saying marriage is like the process of wearing a shoe. At some point, there's going to be a pebble that's stuck in that it gets stuck in the shoe. And it's important to address that pebble early on so that it doesn't become a boulder. And that's how it is with emotions. And so the more we allow ourselves to become attuned to these impulses, to be aware of them instead of trying to say, I'm not going to feel that, I'm going to ignore that, I'm going to shove that away. When we can allow it to arise, or when we can be present to it when it's present, then we can allow the energy of that, because emotion is energy in motion. It truly is energy. We can allow that energy to move. If we tamp it down, if we repress it, if we deny it, it doesn't make it go away. It just may make it go out of immediate consciousness. But what happens is that energy is still there, the energy of that emotion. And many, many, many people, after extended periods of time of repressing emotion, manifest symptoms in their bodies because they haven't allowed that integration, that wholeness. They haven't allowed the awareness of those emotions. I haven't dealt with them. And the judgment that we impose upon ourselves on top of already difficult emotions is kind of creating a greater brutalization, right? Like, what's wrong with me that I'm so angry, or what's wrong with me that I'm so sad, or that just compounds things rather than, oh, I feel sad right now, what's happening and what do I need? Maybe a gentle word to ourselves instead of stop being so weak, or stop being so reactive, or stop being so sensitive. Or we often get these messages when we're growing up. And rather than that is, what about a soothing word? It's okay. It's okay. You're going to be okay. You're okay. It's okay. Right here, right now. Those simple words, soothing oneself, loving ourselves, giving ourselves compassion, giving ourselves understanding, the way that we might soothe a wounded child. Because I would venture to say that most, if not all of us, are still carrying around elements of a wounded child. And every now and then that child surfaces, maybe more than every now and then. And in many cases, that child is running our lives and we don't even know it. So this was really interesting. I did a session with a client. It was super powerful. And their experience was going back to a a childhood interpretation of an event that when they went back sort of through a timeline, they had a reinterpretation at a later date. The earlier child was 7, the later child was 16. And in speaking to this person, they had turned this child, this 7-year-old wounded child, into, they represented them as a tyrant, a child tyrant. So clearly we have more work to do. I said, well, that child was just deeply hurt and deeply wounded and felt deeply abandoned. And somehow this person changed that child into a tyrant that had kind of dictated the trajectory of their lives from that time. And so, like, leveling that judgment, that's another form. Like, this kid, this little 7-year-old that was so hurt, was a tyrant. That's another judgment interpretation. So it's like a lack of acceptance and compassion and care for that child, right? Like, that child isn't integrated as an intelligence, as an aspect of self that was deeply wounded, that's calling for healing, beating up that kid for having felt beaten up by calling him a tyrant, right? So this level of judgment, self-judgment, separation, right? Breaking ourselves into parts that are acceptable and not acceptable, because we're taught that's not acceptable behavior, right? Rather than maybe there is another dimension of self-acceptance that we can cultivate that allows for extending compassion for what we have considered bad behavior. The thing is that when we can recognize that we all have multiple aspects, that we all have parts that might be construed as less than desirable, that we have behaviors that we judge in that way. And when we come to accept those parts of ourselves with some understanding, with some compassion, what happens is it gives us a greater compassion for others as well. It gives us a greater and deeper love for others as well. And so I invite all of us to look at the moments when we have harsh words, to actually hear those harsh words, because some of us are so conditioned into that kind of pattern that we don't even hear ourselves berating ourselves. We don't even hear the nasty things we say to ourselves. So if we can bring those messages that we're constantly reinforcing, if we can bring those to consciousness and instead treat ourselves with a loving heart. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry you're feeling so bad. It's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Those words can make such a big difference to our body and being, to our nervous system. You know, when you soothe, what happens to your nervous system when you feel soothed, when you feel safe, when you feel loved? What happens? Your nervous system calms down. And we know that so much dis-ease is caused by stress. So if we can allow ourselves to move through these challenges with compassion, if we can embrace them as loving growth opportunities. Not to say it's okay, you acted out and that's okay, and leave it at that. It's more like, what was underneath that? What is calling for healing? I am loved by God says, I wish I could connect with you. You know what you could do is go to my website, yourcoreconnection.com. And I believe you can sign up for the mailing list. You may be able to send an email that way. My email, and I don't check email that often, which is why I wasn't giving it out. My email is Mira at yourcoreconnection.com. So that's a way that you can reach me potentially. Like I said, I do not check my email frequently. So it's kind of hit or miss. That's why I was suggesting messaging through Facebook. So compassion. As we cultivate our compassion for ourselves, we allow ourselves to create greater wholeness for ourselves. When we become more whole, as we become more whole, we're able to be more present. We're able to be more responsive to the moment rather than reactive. We're able to come from a place of greater connection, greater love. It's a journey. It's a journey that we're on together, and very much on our own as well. And as we heal, the whole field gets elevated. As we heal, it impacts others. And it becomes a virtuous cycle. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel, as well as my Facebook page. And I invite you to like, follow, and share Enlightened World and Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description, and I'm ever grateful for the opportunity and privilege to share these musings together. And until next time, so much love to you.